I'll call the meeting to order of the Town of Hilton Head Island Board of Zoning Appeals, regular meeting for Monday, February 22nd, 2021 at 2:31 p.m. And Ms. Haley, I would ask if we're in compliance with FOIA, which for the public is known as the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act, and requirements of the Town of Hilton Head Island.
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Haley, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Walzak?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. White?
Present.
Ms. Loudermilk?
Present.
Mr. Johnson?
Present.
Dr. Ponder?
Present.
Mr. Fingerhut?
Present.
Ms. Bryson?
Present. And Ms. Haley, if you can help me out to introduce members of the town staff who are present. I did also see briefly, although I can only see eight screens in front of me, that Town Council member Tom Lennox had joined us. I do not know whether or not any other town council members are present. But Ms. Haley, can you help me out with town staff members who may be present?
Yes, ma'am. Town staff members present, we have Brian Eber, Diane Bush, we have Nicole Dixon, Missy Lewick, Tyler Newman, and Terry Lewis.
Thank you, ma'am.
And also, Madam Chair, from Town Council, we have, yes, Mr. Lennox and Ms. Becker.
Welcome, Town Council members Lennox and Becker. At this time on the agenda is my welcome and introduction to board procedures. And at the outset, I will remind folks that the Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-judicial board. And our goal and our responsibility is to ensure a fair and impartial hearing for applicants and staff members. In doing that, we follow both procedural and substantive due process, which means that, pardon me, we follow the requirements of the land management ordinance and our rules of procedure with regard to procedural due process, pardon me, and we follow the standards set forth in the LMO and in our rules of procedure with regard to the substance. And today's hearings will be focused on variances. And the standards for those are found in section 16-2-103S of the Land Management Ordinance, or the LMO, and in Article 7 of the Rules of Procedure of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Under our rules of procedure, the process for hearing an application for a variance is as follows. The town staff shall have a maximum of 20 minutes to present the facts and applicable legal principles which the staff believes support the position of staff with respect to the application for a variance. During the presentation by staff, members of the Board of Zoning Appeals may ask such questions as they deem appropriate. At the discretion of the chair, staff's time may be extended if the staff is unable to complete the presentation due to questioning from the Board of Zoning Appeals. The applicants then have a maximum of 20 minutes each to present the facts and applicable legal principles that the applicants believe support their applications for a variance. During the presentations by the applicants, members of the Board of Zoning Appeals may ask such questions as they deem appropriate. At the discretion of the chair, the applicant's time may be extended if the applicant is unable to complete the presentation due to questioning from the Board of Zoning Appeals. The staff shall then have a maximum of 5 minutes to present any desired rebuttal. Also, the applicants will have 5 minutes for rebuttal. Following the presentation, the board may ask such additional questions of the applicant or staff as the board members deem appropriate. Public comment is allowed in this process. The chair will call on interested persons and request that they come to the podium, and in this case, we will explain the procedure for public comment during these virtual hearings. Following the presentation by all parties and the public comment period, the board, upon motion duly made and seconded, shall vote on the application for a variance. The motion shall contain at a minimum a finding of those facts which the member making the motion deems material to the decision and appropriate references to the relevant criteria of the Land Management Ordinance, LMO. The board then shall either approve the application for a variance, approve the application for variance with conditions or modifications, or deny the application for variance. Following the vote, the staff shall prepare a written notice of action, which is subsequently served upon the applicant. That's the process that we'll be following, along with the standards set forth in the LMO. At this time on our agenda, we'll ask for approval of the agenda. And the first question I have is, do the staff or any board members have changes to the agenda?
No changes from staff.
Thank you. Any board members' changes? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Ms. Loudermilk made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, was that you, Mr. Johnson, or Mr. White?
White.
Thank you, Mr. White. Teresa, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Walczak,
For the motion.
Mr. White,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson.
Was that me?
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
For the motion.
Thank you. Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion. The agenda is approved. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of January 28, 2021. Are there any changes to the minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the January 28, 2021 special meeting?
Charlie will approve those minutes.
Mr. Walczak made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fingerhut. Any discussion on the motion? If not, Ms. Haley, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Walczak,
For the motion.
Mr. White,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion. The next item on our agenda is appearance by citizens. Ms. Haley, will you address that process for us for this virtual hearing?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Public comments concerning agenda items were to be submitted electronically via the Open Town Hall portal. Those comments were provided to the board for review and made part of the official record. Citizens were also provided the option to give public comment during the meeting by phone. There were no requests to give public comment by phone.
Thank you, ma'am. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business, and there is no unfinished business. With that, we will move to new business, and I will open the public hearings for 4 variance applications. Those applications are the following. VAR-001875-2020, request from Eric Schneider for a variance from LMO Section 16-5-102, setback standards, and Section 16-5-103, buffer standards of the LMO, to allow an existing patio to remain in the adjacent use setback and buffer. The property address is 119 Sandcastle Court, with a parcel number of R511-009-000-1152 quadruple O. The next public hearing is variance that's VAR-001870-2020, a request from George F. Zitlaw Jr. for a variance from LMO Section 16-5-102 setback standards and LMO Section 16-5-103 buffer standards to allow an existing patio to remain in the adjacent use setback and buffer. The property address is 123 Sandcastle Court, with a parcel number of R511-009-000-1152 009, 000, 1154, quadruple O. The next public hearing is VAR 001894-2020, a request from Brian Ritchie for a variance from LMO Section 16-5-102 setback standards, Section 16-5-103 buffer standards, and Section 16-5-113 fence and wall standards, all of the LMO, to allow an existing patio to remain and a proposed fence to be added in the adjacent use setback and buffer. The property address is 25 Sandcastle Court with a parcel number of R511 009 000 1115 quadruple O. The final public hearing is VAR 001983-2020, a request from Jennifer Mayoto for a variance from LMO sections 16-5-102 setback standards and section 16-5-103 buffer standards to allow an existing patio to remain in the adjacent use setback and buffer. The property address is 27 Sandcastle Court with a parcel number of R511 009 000 1116 quadruple O. And for the record, I note that these are based upon approved motions for reconsideration, but pursuant to our rules of procedure, it will be treated as though they're a new hearing without reference to the previous matters. And the effect of granting the motion will be that the board will review the entire matter as if no previous vote had been taken. At this time, I'll call upon staff members Missy Lewick and Tyler Newman to make their presentations with regard to these four matters. And they have 20 to 30 minutes total to do that. And Ms. Haley will be our timekeeper. I don't know whether Ms. Lewick or Mr. Newman will proceed first. But...
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Missy Lewick, Senior Planner for the record. I will start the presentation. And as Ms. Bryson already indicated, I'll be teaming up with my colleague Tyler Newman on this presentation. I'll go through the introduction, the background, and specific requests, and Mr. Newman will cover the variance criteria. I did want to point out that two of the cases are reconsiderations. Those are 119 and 123 Sandcastle, but 25 and 27 Sandcastle have not yet been heard by this board. So
thank you, ma'am.
Wanted to clarify, yes, two of them are reconsiderations, but two of them are not. All right, thank you for getting the presentation set up, Teresa. I appreciate that. So again, as I already explained, this presentation does cover all four of the public hearings, and Ms. Bryson already went through the variance case numbers and their locations. Although the order in the agenda has them as in the order indicated on this slide, going forward in the presentation, we will cover them in order starting from lowest to highest. So we'll start with 25, 27, 119, and 123 going forward. Next slide. So
I'm sorry, Ms. Lewick, can you bear with us? I know that I'm needing to find where you are on my screen since you're going in the order other than what's in the agenda package. So give us just a moment to make sure all board members can find where we are.
can you see the screen? Are you seeing the
Yes, can see the screen. Okay, I think we're ready to go unless any board member need another moment, or hearing none, go ahead and proceed.
Okay. So all of these requests are requests for variances from LMO section 16.5.102 setback standards, section 16.5.103 buffer standards. However, one of the cases is also seeking a variance from 16.5.113 fence and wall standards. That's for Mr. Ritchie's request for a proposed fence that is not in place yet. Three of the four requests are seeking, again, a variance from the setback and buffer standards, but for 25 Sandcastle, Mr. Ritchie is also requesting a variance from the fence and wall standards. Next slide. So the subject properties are located in the Sandcastle by the Sea subdivision off of Follyfield Road. The subdivision was approved in 2007. It was subdivision 050002 was the case number back then. The subdivision is surrounded by the Hilton Head Beach and Tennis Resort, which is multifamily residential to the east, single family residential to the south, town-owned property and single family residential to the north, and Adventure Cove and Carrabba's restaurant and an office building to the west. Next slide. At today's meeting, we'll again be hearing cases from 25, 27, 119, and 123 Sandcastle. And on the next slide, those properties are highlighted. And here's also an aerial view of the particular neighborhood, as well as the properties highlighted. And the next slide shows also the properties highlighted again in street view, so you can get an idea of where we're talking about in relation to the neighborhood. Next slide. This slide shows, it's a little bit hard to read and it will be zoomed in on the next couple of slides, but this is the original subdivision plat. And the Sandcastles by the Sea subdivision was approved with a 20-foot adjacent use setback and buffer around the perimeter of the subdivision. There was a 25-foot adjacent use buffer that was approved in the western subdivision perimeter, and those are shown on the subdivision plat. Next slide. So now we're zoomed in, and you can see here is the area that is adjacent to the beach and tennis resort. 25 Sandcastle is lot 9 on this plat, and 27 Sandcastle is lot 10. And the 20-foot setback and buffer is highlighted there on this slide, so you can see that. Next slide. Here you can see a little bit close-up of the subdivision plat for the properties that are adjacent to the town-owned Follyfield property. And 119 Sandcastle is lot 46 on this plat, and 123 Sandcastle is lot 48. And the 20-foot setback and buffer is highlighted. Next slide. So the purpose of setbacks and buffers are listed here on this slide. I'm not going to go through and read them, but the intent of those is to separate development from the adjacent development with aesthetically pleasing buffers and setbacks to allow for those buffers to occur. The buffer and setback areas do frequently overlap, but the standards that apply to these areas are different. For example, uncovered patios are allowed to encroach up to 5 feet in a setback, but patios are not allowed in a buffer, which are meant to be landscaped or naturally vegetated. Next slide. And here's the current LMO regulations for a type A buffer. And at the time when the subdivision was approved, we did not have flexibility in the buffer options. So we didn't have an option 1 and an option 2 for the buffer standards like we do today. And so with the 2014 rewrite, those buffer standards were made more flexible, which is what you see on this screen with the 2 options that are available. So for the portion of the subdivision that is adjacent to 25 and 27 Sandcastle, the subdivision development would now require either an option, type A option 1, or less densely vegetated buffer, type A option 2. More densely vegetated buffer for single family residential use adjacent to a multifamily residential use. And these buffer types and options are explained in our buffer table attachment that we have in the staff report. So a 20-foot setback is still required along the perimeter of a single family subdivision adjacent to multifamily residential use. So today when we would look at this, the setback would remain the same, but it is possible that an option 2 buffer could be reviewed and approved. Next slide. So here, if we were reviewing this portion of the subdivision today, again, this is the portion that is adjacent to the beach and tennis resort and the lagoon, and includes 25 and 27 Sandcastle, which are before us today. We could review and look at the option 2 type A buffer, which would be adjacent to multifamily use, the beach and tennis resort. So, however, in your public comments that were emailed and that the board has been made aware of with the past Sandcastle requests that are along the same lagoon, we have been made aware that there are private covenants that do exist that require a 20-foot buffer adjacent to the beach and tennis. Next slide. So this shows you the type C buffer. At the time that the subdivision was approved, we did not, again, have flexibility in the buffer options. And if we were reviewing this development today, it would require either a type C option 1 or a type C option 2 buffer for the single family residential use adjacent to a vacant resort development property, which is what the Folly Field town-owned property is currently zoned. And as some of you may be aware, the town is pursuing a rezoning of the vacant town-owned property from resort development to PR, Parks and Recreation. This rezoning already went to Planning Commission and has gone to Town Council for their first reading. The rezoning has been recommended for approval, and Town Council recommended it for approval, and it will go back before them at their meeting on March 2nd for second reading. But currently it is not yet rezoned to PR, so its current zoning is still resort development. And so if the zoning is officially changed to PR, and if we were reviewing the setbacks and buffers for subdivision approval today, then the setback would be 20 feet and the buffer could be a type A option 1 or option 2. And so again, the type A option 1 is 20 feet and the option 2 is 10-foot buffer. Next slide. So this has been a little bit of an update in this report since we have done it previously with the advancement of the town-owned rezoning. Again, it differs from today. If we were looking at this adjacent to RD zone property, it would have a 30-foot setback and a type C buffer, which is more strict than what the subdivision was approved as, which is shown as a 20-foot setback and buffer. So again, if the rezoning is approved to rezone the town-owned property to PR, like I said before, it could be reviewed and that we would look at this subdivision if we were approving it today with the opportunity to have an option 2 buffer, type A buffer. Next slide. So how did we get here? We have 4 cases before us today seeking encroachment variances. So in July of 2019, there were several complaints that staff received about property owners removing vegetation in the buffers and making improvements, such as patios within the buffer. Upon a site visit, staff found that there were several violations in the area which we received complaints about. There were violation letters that were sent to property owners, notifying them of the violation and providing a deadline to remove the encroachments or apply for a variance. So there was a representative of the property owners who contacted staff after receiving the violation letters and asked if the deadline to remove the encroachment could be extended to November 2019, as the majority of the homes were vacation rentals and it was in the middle of the summer season, and staff felt that was reasonable and extended that deadline. Then in early fall 2019, The representatives of the property owners met with staff to discuss their options. And one of the requests was to reduce the buffer to the 10-foot buffer option. And staff informed them that to utilize the reduced buffer option, the entire subdivision plat would have to be revised and recorded. And town staff had been working with the representatives to pursue a buffer reduction request for the entire subdivision, but it was determined by the representative to be too costly to do, and they didn't think they could get the required 100% owner's consent to do so. So then staff was informed in the spring of 2020 that there were several other properties in this subdivision that had encroachments in the buffer. And staff decided to do a site visit to all the properties in the subdivision and compiled a list of the violations. In August of 2020, a second violation letter was issued to property owners with a deadline to remove the encroachments and restore the buffers back to a vegetated area by October 1, 2020. And the property owners were informed that if they did not adhere to the deadline, then the town would place a hold on their parcel, making it so no further building permits could be issued until the violation had been corrected. And the property owners were also informed that they had the option to apply for a variance if they wish to keep the encroachments, which is why we're here today. So that covers some of the history, and now we're going to go into more specific of each of the requests. Next slide. This is 25 Sandcastle. This is the request of Mr. Brian Ritchie. It's variance 001894-2020. And this home was constructed in 2017 and purchased by the current owner in November of 2017. It's currently developed with a 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 of unheated square feet with 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a garage, and a pool. And you can see from this as-built drawing where the home is situated on the lot, as well as the 20-foot setback and buffer label that's here. Next slide. Now this one is oriented a little bit different, but you can see the setback and buffer area here on this slide, and where the approximate patio has been constructed, as well as a line that shows where a proposed fence is to be located. So after this home was constructed and the certificate of occupancy was issued, the homeowner had an approximate 10-foot 4-inch by 33-foot 9-inch paver patio constructed in the rear of the property that extended from the pool area into the rear adjacent use setback and buffer. The patio encroachment is approximately 10 foot 4 inches in the adjacent use setback and buffer. The parcel shape is mostly rectangular, but at the rear of the property, it's angled slightly to follow the edge of the lagoon. And because of the slightly irregular parcel shape, the dimensions of the setback and buffer encroachments are lesser on the south side and of the lot and greater on the north side. LMO section 16.5.102E allows for uncovered porches, stoops, decks, patios, or terraces to extend up to 5 feet into any setback. While a patio can encroach up to 5 feet in a setback, it cannot encroach into a buffer. And the existing patio even exceeds what the allowable setback encroachment allows. So in this case, the applicant is seeking a 15-foot encroachment into the setback and buffer to keep the existing patio and to install a proposed fence in the setback and buffer. Next slide. Here are some of the images of the existing patio and their property, as well as some of the existing vegetation that's been planted in their buffer. Next slide. Now we're going to cover 27 Sandcastle. The applicant is Jennifer Mioto, variance VAR-001983-2020. And this property, 27 Sandcastle, was constructed in 2016 and purchased by the current owner in July of 2016. This property is currently developed with a 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 unheated square feet with 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a garage, and a pool. And this slide does show the as-built here. If you do look right near the decking, you can see the 20-foot building setback and buffer label on the as-built. Next slide. So after the home was constructed and the certificate of occupancy was issued, the owner had an approximate 24-foot, 7-inch by 8-foot, which was field measured paver patio and wall constructed in the rear of the property, extending from the pool area into the rear adjacent use setback and buffer. The patio encroachment is approximately 8 feet in the setback and buffer, although it tapers to a lesser encroachment length due to the irregular parcel shape. Again, as I just mentioned, that the LMO allows for a setback encroachment for an uncovered patio to encroach up to 5 feet, but our buffer requirements do not allow such an encroachment, as well as it exceeds the 5-foot encroachment, setback encroachment that is allowed. So the applicant is seeking an 8-foot encroachment into the setback and buffer. In one section of their submittal, I wanted to point out that they're requesting a 15-foot variance, but in other areas of their application, they're requesting 8 foot. And I measured it out there. It appears that it's approximately 8 feet. Next slide. And here was a detail that was provided by the applicant where you can see the approximate encroachment area highlighted. So it's about 8 feet at its widest. Next slide. And at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Tyler Newman.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, Tyler Newman, Senior Planner for the record. Up here, you'll see the as-built for 119 Sandcastle Court, which is variance case VAR-001875-2020. The applicant is Eric Schneider. Subject property 119 Sandcastle Court was constructed in 2018 and was purchased by the current owner in July 2020. Currently a 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 unheated square feet, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, and a garage. It's been constructed at the property. Next slide, please. Above, you'll see photos of the patio in question. After the home was constructed and the certificate of occupancy was issued, the previous owner of the property had a paver patio and stone retaining wall constructed in the rear of the property, extending from the pool area into the rear adjacent use setback and buffer. Next slide, please. Next, we have 123 Sandcastle Court. This is the as-built for that property. The variance case there is VAR-001870-2020, and the applicant is George Zitlaw. The subject property, 123 Sandcastle Court, was purchased by the applicant in 2017, and the certificate of occupancy for a new single-family residence was issued in 2018. A 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 unheated square feet, 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and a swimming pool currently exists on the subject property. Next slide, please. Above, you'll see photos of the patio in question for 123 Sandcastle. After the home was constructed and the certificate of occupancy was issued, The applicant had a paver patio and stone retaining wall constructed in the rear of the property, extending from the pool area into the rear adjacent use setback and buffer. Next slide, please. And here's just another photo of the patio at 123 Sandcastle Court. Next slide, please. All right, we are going to now jump into the actual variance criteria. Variance criteria number 1, there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. In this case, all of the subject properties are approximately 0.07 acres in size, with the exception of 25 and 27, which are both approximately 0.09 acres. Most of the lots within the Sandcastle by the Sea subdivision range in size from 0.06 to 0.13 acres, with the majority of those lots having an average of about 0.07 acres. The subject properties are all rectangular in shape, as are the majority of the adjacent properties within Sandcastle by the Sea. And the subject properties do not contain any unique site features that prohibit development on the site. The subject properties are average in shape and size for the subdivision and do not contain any extraordinary or exceptional conditions that prohibit development on the lot. Therefore, staff concludes that these applications do not meet variance criteria number 1. Next slide, please. Variance criteria number 2. These conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. As we just established, staff finds that there are no extraordinary or exceptional conditions that pertain to the subject properties. A 20-foot adjacent use setback and buffer is applied to all properties located on the perimeter of the subdivision, except those on the western perimeter, which have a 25-foot adjacent use setback and buffer. The majority of all lots in the Sandcastle by the Sea subdivision are nearly identical in size and shape. The conditions that apply to the subject properties also apply to other properties in the vicinity. Based off these findings, staff concludes that these applications do not meet the criteria because there are no extraordinary or exceptional conditions that apply to the subject properties that do not also generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. Next slide, please. Variance criteria number 3. Because of these conditions, the application of this ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. The original developer of the Sandcastle by the Sea neighborhood chose to utilize nearly every square foot of buildable space on the subject properties. The original subdivision plat for the Sandcastle by the Sea neighborhood requires that a 20-foot adjacent use setback and buffer be applied to the rear of each of the subject properties. The original plat for the Sandcastle by the Sea subdivision has a note that reads, quote, "The only activities permitted in the exterior subdivision buffer as labeled on this plan shall be those listed in permitted activity in other buffer areas as per the Land Management Ordinance." Land Management Ordinance Section 16.5.103J, development within required buffers, does not list a patio as a permitted activity within a required buffer. Next slide, please. So now we're going to run through the criteria that was already addressed to some degree and when we were speaking about each case individually, but I do think it is applicable to variance criteria 3. To note that at 25 Sandcastle Court, there's currently a 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 unheated square feet, 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, and a garage. Next slide, please. Currently at 27 Sandcastle Court, there is a 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 unheated square feet, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, and a garage. Next slide, please. Currently at 119 Sandcastle Court, there is a 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 unheated square feet, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, and a garage. Next slide, please. And at 123 Sandcastle Court, there is a 3-story single-family residence with 3,314 heated square feet, 1,137 unheated square feet, 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, a garage. Based off of this information, staff concludes that these applications do not meet the criteria because there are no extraordinary or exceptional conditions that apply to the subject properties that would prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the properties. Next slide, please. Variance criteria number 4. The authorization of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or the public good, and the character of the zoning district where the property is located will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. Staff received no letters of opposition to any of the variance requests at the time the staff report was written. The purpose of the adjacent use buffer standards is to spatially separate development from adjacent development with aesthetically pleasing natural or landscaped buffers. The purpose of the adjacent use setback standards is to provide separation between structures and property lines. Such separation is intended to maintain and protect the town's island character and facilitate adequate air circulation and light between structures and adjacent developments. The use of hardscape in the buffer area is a modification to the civil engineer's stormwater runoff calculations for the Sandcastle by the Sea subdivision. The area that is considered buffers typically produces very little stormwater runoff due to the existing natural understory flora. When this area is disturbed and modified with patio pavers, gravel, and sand, it drastically changes the amount of stormwater runoff from what was expected to be from a natural vegetative buffer. Next slide, please. In the cases of 119 and 123 Sandcastle Court, both properties directly adjacent to each of those properties have encroachments into the setback and buffer as well, and have also applied for a variance to keep them. In the cases of 25 and 27 Sandcastle Court, one directly adjacent property has encroachments in the setback and buffer, and it has applied for a variance to keep them. Next slide, please. And Missy touched on this slightly earlier, but staff has been informed, and this is specifically only pertinent to 25 and 27 Sandcastle Court. Staff has been informed that private covenants exist that prohibit disturbance of the 20-foot buffer along the lagoon in between the Sandcastle by the Sea subdivision and the Hilton Head Beach and Tennis Resort development. The private covenants prohibit the developer or the property owner from seeking the 10-foot buffer option adjacent to the Hilton Head Beach and Tennis development. Due to the number of buffer encroachments and the impacts to the stormwater system, town engineering staff have recommended that this practice not be allowed to continue. With regard to these variance requests, Staff concludes that these applications do not meet the criteria for variance criteria number 4 because the variance will be of a substantial detriment to the adjacent properties because the purpose of the setback and buffer requirements is to provide visual and spatial separation between developments and mitigate the negative effects between adjacent uses. Next slide, please. Since staff finds that none of the 4 variance criteria are met with these applications, staff recommends that the Board of Zoning Appeals deny the applications. And that concludes staff presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Newman and Ms. Lewick. It is now time for questions from the board members of the staff after their presentations. And we'll go in a rotating order. And the rotating order will change each time so that board members don't have to go first or last or in the middle each time. And board members are always allowed to pass if they have no comment or questions. So the first listing would start with Mr. Fingerhut with any questions he might have of staff.
Yes, just one. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was curious about really any of the 4 applicants here. Did any of them, after the C of O was issued, apply for and get a permit for the patio and retaining walls that were built?
Missy, I'll go. All right, so the town actually doesn't require the issuance of a building permit for a patio. Therefore, they weren't required to obtain one.
And that includes the retaining walls as well?
I believe Missy, do you know the exact height threshold for a building permit for a retaining wall? I want to say off the top of my head that it's 3 feet. And I believe that the retaining walls in question didn't meet that height requirement that would have required a building permit.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Walzak, questions? Any questions from you?
No, thank you. Not at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. White, any questions from you?
No, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, any questions from you?
Yeah, just one, thank you. Tyler, and this isn't so much a question, I think, as asking you to restate to make sure that I'm clear on something you said. Something to the effect that the original, I believe, recorded plat for the subdivision did contain a note that reiterated that the only improvements or activity, construction type activity that could occur in the buffer were those identified in the LMO.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The exact verbiage that they had was the only activities permitted in the exterior subdivision buffer as labeled on this plan shall be those listed in permitted activity in other buffer areas as per the land management ordinance.
Okay, and again, that was on the original recorded plat.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all righty. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, any questions from you?
I have no questions at this time.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Ponder, questions from you?
No questions at this time.
Okay. That leaves it to the chair who goes last. I think, Mr. Newman, I heard during your presentation on criteria 4 that the staff had received no letters of opposition to the variance request, any of the variance requests at the time the staff report was prepared. But I understand from looking at the responses on the town's portal that we do have opposition, which has been made a part of the record. So am I confused about that, or is that accurate?
No, you're correct, and that would be incorporated into the record. It's just, we prepare the staff reports well before those public comments come through. Okay,
thank you. And those comments have been made available to board members and are part of the record.
Yes, ma'am.
Circling back, any other questions of board members before we go to the presentation by the applicants?
Madam
Hearing
Chair,
none.
this is Nicole.
Yes,
Madam
ma'am.
Chair, this is Nicole Dixon.
Yes, ma'am.
We have Brian Eber on the call, our stormwater engineer, and I just wanted, he's got another commitment and he's got to get off the call. I think he said at 3:45. And so I just wanted to let you know he was on the call. And if you had any questions stormwater related, perhaps you all can answer them now or ask them now so that Brian can answer before he gets off the call.
Okay, that would be still part of the staff presentation.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
let me just ask generally, do any board members have questions of Mr. Eber before he needs to be dismissed from the process? Hearing none.
Well, yes, yeah, this is.
Sorry, Ms.
Lisa.
Loudermilk. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I want to ask the obvious. Mr. Eber, part of staff's findings are that the existence of the pavers does in fact change the stormwater runoff calculations. Were there any new calculations performed after the pavers were put in place?
Ma'am, very good question. Very good question. I have not received any from any of the homeowners that would show what the results are as a result of paving the area versus planting it in a naturalized buffer. If I could, just real quickly, I'll share my screen with you guys.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Anything now?
No, sir. All I've got is a blue screen with nothing on it but blue.
Madam Chair, this is Teresa.
Yes, ma'am.
Brian, you have two monitors, correct?
Yes.
If you'll bring whatever you're sharing over to your other monitor, it should show up.
I just did that, but it doesn't appear to be showing yet. And what I'm trying to show you is I'm trying to show you a grading plan from 2005 prior to the issuance of the subdivision plat, which is in 2006. And it kind of shows the grading and shows the berm behind some of these lots, 46 and 48, that's up for today's discussion for variance request, and how it was graded prior to the homes even being built. So there's always been a berm there, and there's been a fence there for quite some time, but that was incorporated into the original grading plans. And just wanted you to see that, in fact, that this wasn't something done by the home builders. This was a berm that was already pre-existing in place. And I know that came up at different points in the previous one. So I will stop sharing my screen because you can't see anything.
Brian, if you'd like to send it over to me and I can pull it up.
Did you receive it, Teresa?
Yes, give me one moment to pull it up here.
It also shows the 20-foot building setback line and the 20-foot buffer. So when they had originally envisioned this development to occur, they had set in place certain overarching restrictions to the lots, and that was part of it. Part of my other discussion on the permeable pavers versus the naturalized buffer is that over a period of years, even though we sweep our permeable paver parking lots on a weekly basis, they do start to deteriorate, and they do need to undergo major reconstruction efforts because they're no longer performing as originally designed. But the beauty of a naturalized buffer is that it actually improves over time. The trees get bigger, the shrubs get bigger, and their root zones get bigger. So they're actually promoting more infiltration over their lives than what will happen and occur over a permeable paver patio. So I just kind of wanted to keep that in frame as you consider these items, that the two are not exclusive, although the two do promote infiltration. The one will have a lifespan that will function longer and in a more productive manner.
Mr. Eber and Ms. Haley, what I'm seeing on my screen, it appears to be a parking lot with some buildings with mixed use.
Yeah, this is the Carrabba's grill, and this is sheet 1. So if you go to sheet 3,
okay.
This one starts to show some of the building setbacks line. There's sheet 2, and there's sheet 3. And I believe it's lot 46 and 48 that's up for discussion today. And then you can see, if you move the cursor, there's the word berm, and just beneath that word berm it says 20-foot building setback, and then / buffer. And this, again, if you look at the date over in the bottom right-hand corner, it is from 2005. And just wanted you to have that for some context going forward. It was always intended to be an area where naturalized buffer would be versus a patio.
May I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Dr. Ponder.
I might have missed it. I apologize if I did. What do you think the estimated sort of life of the pavers would be?
That's a really good question. Typically, the lifespan on a municipal parking lot or a park, we have to maintain it. You're looking at probably 15 years max, even with steady sweeping on a weekly basis. Some homeowners are great. I mean, they have it blown off on a regular basis, and they might expect that kind of lifespan as well. But the little voids between the pavers get filled with leaves and debris and sand and whatnot. And so that functional reliability of those permeable slots between the pavers does decrease versus a living tree and bush, which actually grows bigger, becomes more ability to evapotranspirate and work to reduce the amount of volume of water as a result.
Other board members have questions before I ask any questions? I'm looking at, and I'm able to enlarge the berm area on my screen at home. It appears as though there are topographic lines from those lots about halfway back towards their back property line. And I think it's 48 and 49, if I have the right numbers. Lots 48 and 49 on the subdivision plat. But I see where the berm is and where the 20-foot building setback line buffer is located. But my question for you is, if those houses, including the swimming pool, are flat, it appears as though they cut into the topographic area, which may have increased the slope on the berm. So that's my question: is were those building sites cut into a small slope there, which would have made the berm steeper?
Yes, ma'am. They absolutely were altered. I don't have a final as-built survey. This is the plans only. I wish I had one, but that would show you where, in fact, they did have to cut in towards that back berm in order to place the house at a more flat slope, because that's what exists today. There is a slope out there, but it's not as steep as what's shown on this grading plan from 2005.
Okay. But would cutting into that slope increase the erosion runoff from the berm towards the building site?
Yeah, it could. Yes, it would be expected as they were building the house that they would mitigate for that approach and have to do some grading in that back berm in order to bring it into compliance. So it's not as erosive and runoff. But you have seen, and I have seen several photographs showing that what was left to them did erode into their back. But you also see that there's no plantings at all that occurred back there to kind of offset that erosive nature.
So in addition to a retaining wall, as I understand what you're saying is that you could grade away from the house to direct any sort of erosion from going towards the swimming pool or the house and going away from it. But is that accurate?
It would be tight, but yes, you could have sloped it away from the house even further. Again, it's more grading. We would prefer the use of plant material versus just sheer grading.
And would that preference include plant material over a retaining wall?
Having visited all the sites, I believe the retaining wall is something that is needed given the existing grading that's occurred out there. It should be left in place, the retaining wall. That is a solution. The other solution would be, major regrading of that, and it still have to be a retaining wall at some point, but it could be inside the 20-foot buffer is where they could have put the retaining wall along that line versus actually inside the buffer. But there would have to be a retaining wall at some point. It just didn't necessarily have to be within the buffer. It could have been at the setback line.
I see. Thank you. Those are my questions. Any other board members have questions?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Mr.
Madam
Walczak.
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Brian, can you please tell me, wasn't there a drainage plan prepared for this development?
Sir, I've looked long and hard for one, but I have been unable to find a drainage plan. I found a grading plan, and I found what they call a stormwater plan. And the stormwater plan just mainly relates to the piping network and the stormwater BMPs, the ponds. It did not go into as detail as we require today.
Oh, so you mean today's requirements are more stringent than they were back in 07, 08, I guess?
Yes, sir. And yeah, in 05, our requirements are not when the LMO was last updated in 2014, I believe. And in that, we redid our stormwater rules and regulations for the LMO, and we upgraded our standards, what we seek to know and help before we make decisions on stormwater.
Yeah, because it would be interesting to know that whatever grading plan was there may have been interfered with by these patios. And that would be good knowledge to know.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board member questions of Mr. Eber? Okay. Anything else from the staff at this point?
And again,
Okay.
I apologize for having to leave.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Anything else from staff? If not, we'll move into the presentations by the applicants. Again, each applicant has 20 minutes to present their case, and Ms. Haley will be our timekeeper. There will be a sound, and she will announce if your time has expired, and she will always do that in a polite and gentle way. So the first applicant on our agenda is Mr. Schneider, 119 Sandcastle. The case number VAR-000-1875-2020. There, I see you, Mr. Snyder. I can see you on the screen. So you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Sir.
So I'm here today to request a variance from LMO section 16.5.102 setback standards and 16.5.103 buffered standards to allow my existing permeable paver stormwater drainage system to remain in my adjacent use setback and buffer. I'd like to share my screen.
Yes, sir. The staff is assisting. We almost have it.
All right.
You may proceed.
All right. Everybody can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right.
We can
All
see,
right.
I'm sorry, Mr. Snyder, we can see your larger slide, but we also see your deck of slides over to the left. So
in my presentation today, I have a lot of information, and I want to be cognizant to use my time wisely and try to fit it into my 20-minute presentation timeline. So I'll check with Ms. Haley from time to time to see how I'm doing. I'll leave the deck on the side so I can scroll through and pick up the pace.
Okay.
I'd like to welcome to those watching live on the Facebook feed from Southeast U.S. Region 4, some representatives from the Environmental Protection Agency. I'd like to welcome Sam and Mike. Hopefully you had time to watch the live presentation today for your invite. And from the state, I'd like to invite Arturo, Jill, and Jacob Terry. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about stormwater. I think the whole case here on the northern boundary up against that stockpile is a strong stormwater issue. And the hierarchy for stormwater regulation in the United States is the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level, the state DHEC, and then underneath that tranche is the county township planning departments. And Hilton Head Island is dotted line above the state. So they have a heck of a responsibility as an MS4. So they're dotted line between the federal level and the state. It's a very complex island, and Nicole's team does a fantastic job, especially since the 2014 rewrite. The challenges that initiated that rewrite with so many non-conforming properties out there that needed to be redeveloped. So with a little bit of an audience watching this unique complex issue, I thought it'd be helpful because maybe this is a case study going forward where everybody can learn from this. But how did we get here? Let's take a look at, if you kind of zoom in South Carolina, Georgia border and find Savannah, you're going to find Hilton Head Island. And hopefully the latency is pretty good today. Matthews Drive cuts through 298 and turns into Follyfield Road. And this is Follyfield Beach, a famous beach here on the northern side of the island. This is Follyfield Neighborhood Association, pretty much everything on this Follyfield Road down here to the beach access. And sandcastles exist right here. It's not too far in off of William Hilton Parkway. I'm going to turn on the history dial, and let's go all the way back. See how far back Google Earth takes us. 1985 imagery wasn't great. Let's see if we can go forward. Here's an image from 1994. Adventure Cove hadn't been put in yet. You don't really have Cabanas or the Italian restaurant there yet. You do have the tennis court association here. You don't have the apartment complex that was put here, but you do have this green belt of forest that was owned by Adventure Cove. As we go forward a little bit more, you can see they put in their mini golf course there, and they kept their driving range back here. And back at that time, this had initially been graded and cleared once for a driving range. You heard Brian talk about a stockpile up against this forest. This was all part of Adventure Cove's property back then, and there was a graded pile pushed up over there. I can only assume was to keep golf balls coming back in. As you cruise into probably 2006, you see that the road has been cut in. So now this is when Starfish Investments took over kind of what was going to be Sandcastle subdivision. And at this time, they started working on a site development plan that included micro lots, 0.07 acres in size. And they were going for about 200,000 a piece. You have kind of the market crash of 08, and then Village Park Homes came in and bought a lot of these lots at around 30,000, and brought to town building plans that were set, and they built the homes on the lots and then sold them to the homeowners. So the homeowners didn't really have a lot of choice in the footprint, just the floor plans. You can see the stockpile right here on my cursor, and I'll zoom in there. So, Madam Chairman, you had noticed how far that came out, and it kind of got more defined to the final grading plan. Here you can see it's void of, it's completely disturbed. There's no trees, no vegetation, no natural foliage, no natural flora. And let's get back to where some of the homes are starting to come in now on the central drainage lagoon side. You have April 16, October 2016. And this is really when some of these northern boundary homes up against this stockpile were, beginning to get the plans for and to be put in. And it's just, and then the homes start to come in. So with that being said, I'd like to talk a little bit more about this stockpile. I have some more information about the stockpile that I thought was really good, so I'll share that with you guys. This was these northern boundary homes. All 8 of these homes have tried to seek relief from kind of the floodplain that stockpile was presenting us after our certificate of occupancy was issued. And 5 of my neighbors are at the next level in the circuit court and in mediation to try to get relief to leave our stormwater drainage systems back there. And right now you have myself today at 119 and George at 123 getting a reconsideration. But Brian spoke about that stockpile in the public recorded minutes from my other 5 neighbors, and he can say some of the points I'm about to make better. So I'll go ahead and play that for you now.
Then Ms. Dixon, are you going to be making a presentation as well, or?
No, I'm just calling on Brian Eber. Stormwater.
Okay, this is part of the staff presentation. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead, Mr. Eber.
Thank you again, Madam Chairman. I had a chance to look at the subdivision design was submitted to the town in 2005. There were plans at the time that showed rough outlines of buildings and roads, and importantly, it also showed grades in existing you might find in the field. So on the north property line, there, interestingly enough, there was what they labeled a berm. And this together also noted that on top of that berm was a fence. So if you go out today, it's still the fence that's out there that's on top of the berm still seems to be in place, and that's basically Sandcastle's northern boundary limits, and it hasn't really changed a great deal from that time. The berm, though, is only about 2.5 feet tall, so it's not a very tall berm. But on one side, water runs onto Sandcastle property, and from the other side of the berm, it runs onto town-owned property. The berm's probably about 2.5 feet wide that drains onto Sandcastle. And then it's about approximately the same size like a town property. So all in all, it's about a 5 foot wide berm running along the property line with a fence on top of it.
I'll pause there. It seems I really don't want any of the members to be. I don't think it's fair to downplay or minimize the size of this berm. You heard Brian talk about it being 2.5 feet wide on each side, 5 feet wide in total. We have a 3 foot tall berm that's a 16 foot wide stockpile. The fence runs right down the center of it. 16 foot wide on micro lots is a big deal. It's not a little speed bump. It's not a harmless little berm. The definition of berm when it comes to earth berm and not snow is a stockpile of earth. If it's plowing, it's a stockpile of snow. But a berm is a friendly term, and I've been in construction for 30 years working grading plans and site development in the oil field, right-of-ways for pipelines on the East Coast. Often on our grading plans, as we deal with state and EPA, anytime we grade material, whether it was to get it to the line of disturbance at the edge of inside of a grading plan, that material and that stockpile is no longer natural flora. It can wreak a lot of havoc when a heavy rain event goes on that on those stockpiles. So I think if you go back to 2005 and think about the decision to leave that legacy pile there and take a redeveloped lot and leave that pile there with the intention of putting 0.07 acre lots on it, that might have been an okay decision on typical 0.3 acre lots that are in fully filled, but not 0.07. That's a mistake in foresight of thinking about what those northern boundary homes had to deal with down the line. You left them essentially a floodplain. And that's what every expert I called scoffed and said, yeah, they left you guys with a floodplain back there. They CO'd a floodplain. And when you're talking about the dangers of stormwater and why it's so important to not have a flood zone, especially on anything sensitive, we can look at some of the finer points. The Environmental Protection Agency works to reduce runoff and improve water quality by implementing stormwater management at its facilities. In developed areas, impervious surfaces such as pavement and roofs and stockpiles prevent precipitation from naturally soaking into the ground. Instead, water runs rapidly into storm drains, sewer systems, and drainage ditches, and can cause downstream flooding, stream bank erosion, increased turbidity, mudness created by stirred up sediment from erosion, habitat destruction, combined storm and sanitary sewer system overflows, infrastructure damage, and contaminated streams, rivers, and coastal water. A little bit more about it. What is stormwater according to South Carolina DHEC Gov, their own website? Stormwater runoff occurs when precipitation from rain and snowmelt over the ground, flows over the ground. Impervious surfaces like driveways, sidewalks, streets prevent stormwater from naturally soaking into the ground. Stormwater can pick up debris, chemicals, dirt, and other pollutants and flow into a storm sewer system or directly to a lake, stream, river, wetland, or coastal water. Anything that enters a storm sewer system is discharged untreated into the water bodies we use for swimming, fishing, and providing drinking water. Sediment clouds, excess nutrients cause algae blooms, bacteria, pathogens, debris, household hazardous waste like insecticides. There's reasons the buffers are set up under the modern LMO to be naturally vegetated. And according to the industry standard and to recommendations from the EPA sites, more cities and towns are requiring permeable paver systems as the best way to handle stormwater runoff. So I'd like to set the record straight here. We're not asking to keep, and I'm not asking to keep a patio in the backyard. I'm asking to keep a permeable paver drainage system that's highly functional and allow it to stay in place. I'm showing you a quick video of the 150 foot of greenbelt behind us. And all of these systems here that are successfully collecting the runoff that was going off our side of that 16-foot pile. Here's an example of a small rain event, probably no more than a quarter inch here this last week. If you can imagine what a 1 or 2, 3 inch rain event would look like. But that's water running off a permeable roof, a non-permeable roof, and in between the homes. And this gets shin deep at times. You come over here under our systems, and the water is going straight down in the collection system as they're designed to do. And again, this isn't a public system. There aren't cars driving on it. Every expert I spoke to said this would have been the best solution if they came out to design something with our backyard. So we continue here with some of what Brian spoke about.
The stormwater calculations were submitted to DHEC to review based upon what they thought was going to be a naturalized 20-foot buffer, which generally speaking is a much reduced amount of runoff. The homeowners could have chosen to put a wall up at the 20-foot line and collect and move stormwater in directions around their house and down to the road, but they chose obviously to take a different path. And I'm here to kind of let you know that over time, these have a life cycle. Paver patios have a life cycle, and that life cycle shrinks over time. It degrades. Its ability to allow water to permeate through patio changes over time.
And Brian mirrored and echoed what other experts I talked to, with the exception that they degrade over time if they're not maintained. Every expert I talked to advised that on a residential application like this, these systems properly maintained will clean the water and provide more excellent results, and they'll last as long as they're maintained. So they're a very, very functional, highly functional stormwater collection system is what I have here, if it's properly maintained. And that's the crux of the point here is you have to maintain them. If you don't put oil in a truck or in your vehicle, it only lasts as long as you don't maintain it. And these can last decades maintained. And worst case, you peel them up and you do them over again. But what you're looking at is a sophisticated collection system that every expert I talked to advised they're correcting our problem that we had out there. So I think if you look back in time now and track how we got to where we are today, with those first homes being built, and how is the CO issued? You know, the plot says that the CO, the buffer has to be in compliance with the LMO. But each one of these new homes, as they got the certificate of occupancy approved, and let me see if I got this straight. I want to take it correctly.
Madam
I
Chair,
Yes,
Madam
sir.
Chair, this is
Yes, ma'am.
Teresa. That's the 20-minute mark.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. If you have one concluding sentence, you may do that, but beyond that, your time has expired.
May I request of the board to take some of George's time, George Zitlaw, and if it's all right with George, I'll proceed into his 20 minutes. We have similar cases.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't do that because they're individual cases. If he wants to present additional information during his case, that's a different matter. But
All right. I would just like to conclude then that we were advised by Tyler that the CO was issued with that there was no landscaping plan ever issued for the buffer, and that it was to remain vegetated as it existed at the time. During construction, the home of the builder was required to retain whatever buffer was there at the time when the CO was issued. If during the final inspection the buffer wasn't disturbed, the inspection passed. So the buffer was allowed to be CO'd out of non-conformance. And really, to punch the town's findings here, criteria 1 saying that the staff concludes that this application doesn't meet the criteria set forth in the LMO section because there are no extraordinary exceptional conditions that pertain to this particular property, is not a valid conclusion of law when you consider that there was a stockpile back though that was out of conformance at the time the LMO that the CO was passed.
okay.
And a
All right.
floodplain was there. So every single one of these staff findings are ignoring kind of that fact about the importance of that stockpile. So
Okay. Thank you, sir. I believe
if there's
your
any
time
questions, I'll
has
be happy to
expired.
answer them.
Okay. We will go through the board members again to see if there are any questions, again, in a varied rotating order. This time, Mr. Walczak, your name is up first.
Okay, thank you, but I have no questions at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. White, any questions from you?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, any questions from you?
Yes, Madam Chair. I have one for Mr. Schneider. You focused on the importance of maintaining the pavers to assure that they function as they should. How would you suggest to assure or guarantee or bond the future maintenance of these pavers?
Ms. Loudermilk, there's some interference. How would the last part of the question? How would you
propose to guarantee, I mean, literally financially or by agreement, by bond, but how do we guarantee that the maintenance of these pavers is upheld in the future?
It would be the same if I ever sold my home right now. If I lose this variance hearing and have to return my backyard to the way it was, it was existed at the CO with the muddy stockpile and the dead sod, I would have to get a letter from the town stating that my buffer was allowed to be in that non-conformant state if a future buyer asked for that. I just wouldn't be able to allow the certificate of occupancy in the shape it was in, which was disturbed backyard, without a nonconformance letter. I think as you sell each home, that would be the checkpoint. Is that you have a variance on file saying you have a highly functional stormwater drainage system, and have it flooded and checked as something that passes on to the next buyer. And then you have a conforming drainage system back there. It's how I would do it. I would also make it a condition on the variance request, as if you'd approve this request, you do periodic maintenance on these. as required, which is the cleaning in between the cracks. These aren't public sector and getting driven on. These are just simple little residential drainage systems that are working very well. They just need to be cleaned once a year. I'd make that a condition of the variance, Madam.
Okay.
Any other questions, Ms. Loudermilk?
No.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, any questions from you?
I have no questions at this time, Madam Chairman.
Dr. Ponder, any questions from you?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fingerhut, any questions from you?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. And to me, and I have no questions. At this time, we'll go on to the next applicant. That is George F. Zitlal Jr., BAR 001870-2020, located at 123 Sandcastle. Mr. Zitlal, again, you have 20 minutes, and Ms. Haley will be our timekeeper.
Okay, let me clear my people. All right. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you again for taking your time. I think this is my third time in front of the board. I have been struggling greatly with this because I am not a stormwater expert. I am not a setback and encroachment expert. I have conferred a lot with Eric on this situation, as you heard from him. I think he did an excellent job. My property is in the same condition as his and was in the same condition. The only thing that I would like to share and show, because I think somebody, let me know when you can see that.
Yes, sir, we can see that.
I cannot remember who it was that asked me last time if I had a picture of what the condition that my property was in when we, similar to what Eric talked about. You had this flat area here, and then you had the berm, going the spoil pile or the berm or whatever you want to call it, going up towards the fence, and then you have, the 150 foot, 2 to 3 acres or whatever it is behind the property. This is essentially the condition it was in. We did not touch it. We didn't do anything with it. As you can see, this is just, we were in the framing stage when this picture was taken. So there was no changes to the property. And when we received the CO, it was similar to, and you saw the pictures that Tyler showed earlier. Property was in a similar condition when we got a CO, which would, and I believe Eric was getting to that point when he ran out of time, was it would have been considered in a non-conforming condition. So the thing that I've been trying to read about and study on is how can I, if I'm denied my variance, how can I bring myself into conformance? I've talked with several landscapers, and the costs are pretty exorbitant. I have to take that into consideration. I've been told already after a previous meeting that we can keep the wall. So I'm trying to balance, how do I keep the wall, and I still, because I want to be able to use the space. That's kind of my whole point for asking for the variance is I would like to be able to use the space. So how do I use the space, respect the aspects of having the plantings, and still use the space? So I will leave what Eric said as kind of my argument, and I agree with him that this is a fully functioning system as it sits right now. And if there's a way that we can be granted this variance and have the accessory, because he brings up a very good point. When I go to sell this home, how do I know that the town's not going to come after the next homeowner? And if I'm not mistaken, that situation was not disclosed to Eric when he purchased his home. So he inherited a bad situation, and I, as a responsible citizen, do not want to do that. So I would like to know if there's a way, and if you grant our variance today, is there a way that we can certify our patios as adequate systems to run stormwater. Again, that has been, I think, the major contention of most, if not all, of the board, is how do you treat the land the way that we want it to be treated in an environmentally responsible manner, and how do you not affect stormwater runoff? So that concludes kind of what I wanted to say, and I will cede my time back to the board.
Okay, thank you, sir. This time there'll be questions from the board members, again in a rotating order. This time starting with Mr. White.
Madam Chair, I see Mr. White just dropped from the call. Maybe we could circle back to him.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't see his face on the screen. Thank you. So we'll go to Ms. Loudermilk. Questions from you.
I do not. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, questions from you. Mr. Johnson, you're muted.
I have no questions at Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Ponder, questions from you.
I have no questions at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fingerhut, questions from you.
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Walczak, questions from you.
No questions. Thank you.
Do we see whether or not Mr. White has returned?
He has not at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. So that would be to me, and I have no questions. So we'll move on to the next applicant, Mr. Ritchie, VAR 001894-2020 at 25 Sandcastle. Mr. Ritchie, if you are there, we are ready for you to proceed. Again, you have 20 minutes. Ms. Haley will be our timekeeper.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So I just want to thank the board for hearing the appeals, and with respect to time, I'm going to make my presentation relatively short. I'd like to share my screen, if that's okay.
Yes, sir. We'll let you know when we can see it, and the staff will assist if need be. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We see a screen with some typewritten. It starts at the top, Chapter 16-5-113, Fence and Wall Standards.
Correct. And thank you. And I just want to start that in the previous presentation, they were referred to as micro lots. They are very small lots compared to the rest of the building in the Folly Field area. Also, I used to have a home for 7 years in Indigo Run. That was on 25 Mead. I backed up to a pond there. Much larger lot. No vegetation setbacks there at all. I was quite surprised when I ran into this problem, and I ran into the problem because I had a landscaper take out vegetation in the back and everything, and I was actually contacted by Rocky Browder from the town of Hilton Head, stating that you cannot take out or trim down the vegetation back there. Vegetation plan. So I went with Marco Diaz, and he came back with different grasses and stuff. They all had to be indigenous to the area. That was agreed to by Rocky Browder. He went out and approved it and everything. And this was the area of the revegetation plan. So I had replanted the grasses and all of that. This original grassy area was put in by the builder, and this is the area that I put the permeable pavers over. So it was not part of the revegetation plan. It was there previously, and all I did was put the permeable pavers on top of that. So I thought I was in compliance with the patio that did not need a permit or anything because I did not encroach into this area whatsoever. You can see that this was from the town of Hilton Head, how much this has grown back within the space of 2 years. You can also, can you see this picture that I just put up?
I'm seeing a gray screen.
This is, let's see if I can switch this. Now see this picture?
Yes, sir. We see a house with a lagoon.
Okay, this is my house here, and this is from the Hilton Head Beach and Tennis Club. Their view of the house, you can see within the 2-year period that this has completely grown over. Aesthetically, you cannot see it from the neighbors in back of me. The only 2 houses on either side that would be able to see my patio would be one on that side and the right side or the left-hand side. But as far as from anything else aesthetically, it just looks like the normal vegetation that was there. You'd have to be 14 feet tall to see over everything that's grown. Just want to go back to then my site plan here. A lot has been talked about with the drainage of the patios, and you can see that only a portion of my patio encroaches within the vegetation buffer. That if that was moved over to the northeast side, that there's still area there, that patio that is encroaching were moved over there, that would be within the guidelines. So there's really no extra part of the patio that has anything to do with the stormwater runoff, because if it was relocated, it would still be the same size patio. Also, I have landscapers that come out twice weekly and they blow off the patio and maintain that back area. So it is under maintenance all the time. As I do rent it, it has to be, rental presentable. So the other portion of it was that I would like to put just a small fence, because when you look at the patio and then you saw that thick vegetation that's there, this is a perfect area for alligators to hide in. I just want some type of way that could slow them down or something, because this is highly dense back here in this vegetation. You can't really use it as a backyard because there's no way to walk back there. It's so dense. So that's why I'm asking for if there's some way to get a fence along with that, keep the patio. It doesn't really do anything with the stormwater runoff because it's the same patio. Even if it was reconfigured to that what isn't within the buffer, it would have the same amount of space. These are just pictures of the alligators in the backyard that are very troublesome to, my family's always worried about them. So if there's just some little fence back here on the patio that could somehow keep alligators out, that would be very much appreciated in granting this variance. And with that, I will end my part of the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, sir. We'll move to questions by the board, again in a rotating order. This time, Ms. Loudermilk, you get to go first.
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Is Mr. Johnson, I see Mr. Johnson's name on the screen. Mr. Johnson, any questions from you?
I have no questions at this time, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay. Dr. Ponder, any questions from you?
I have no questions at this time.
Mr. Fingerhut, any questions from you?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Walczak, any questions from you?
Nothing here, thank you.
And Mr. White, any questions from you?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Ritchie, I actually do have a question for you, and that is on your as-built drawing where you have written in by hand, or someone has written in by hand, proposed fence, and proposed 5-foot buffer. That as-built appears to show an elevated wood deck. I did not see that elevated wood deck in your photographs. Is there still an elevated wood deck there?
An elevated, oh, that's on the second floor.
That's the floor above the pool?
Yes, above the pool.
No, now I understand what that's showing. Okay. All right. That's the only question I have, so thank you. All right.
Thank you.
With that, we'll move on to, did we get in touch with Ms. Mioto?
Yes, ma'am. She's on the line.
Okay. Ms. Mioto, it is your time to proceed. I apologize if I'm not saying your last name correctly. Feel free to correct me. You have 20 minutes, and again, Ms. Haley will be our timekeeper. And right now you are muted. I think the staff is unmuted.
There we go.
Yes, ma'am. Now we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. It's Mioto, but that's fine. Everyone says Miato. Okay.
Go ahead. I have a Mazda Miata, so I might be a little skewed.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Missy, I might need your help here. I'm trying to remember if I want to pull just the PDF off my desktop. Once I hit the share screen button, where do I need to go to get to my desktop?
It should give you an option for which file you're sharing.
It gives like PowerPoint, Microsoft Edge, Google Chrome.
Where do you have your PDF? Is it?
I just saved it on my desktop. Was going to pull it from there.
But do you have it open and minimized?
No. I can do that.
Okay.
One sec. Okay, it's open and minimized.
Okay, now go to the share screen button, and then it should be something that you're able to select.
I still don't see it. It's still just showing like applications like Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge. Oh, you know what? Maybe I have to open that Google Chrome and then choose the tab from there, possibly.
Oh, yeah, that.
Did that pull up? Let's see.
Well, right now we're seeing a gray screen.
Okay.
So perhaps do you have two screens as well? Do you have two monitors?
No, I don't. Do you see it now?
Not yet. Try it one more time now that you have it open in Chrome.
I can just pull it from PowerPoint. I just thought the PDF was easier to scroll through. Because I've got it up now. If you don't see it, then.
Well, currently you're not sharing anything. So if you could select.
The screen share button it's grayed out.
Jennifer, this is Nicole. If you want to email it to me, I can share my screen and pull it up.
Okay. Second. I'm emailing it to you, Nicole.
Okay, thanks. I'm still waiting for it to come through.
All right,
We
I
do
just
have
sent it to you.
yes, ma'am. We do have your application before us as part of the agenda package. We will certainly, be patient with technology to try to get this connection made. But if there's anything, pardon me, that you want to be telling us about in the interim, when you're not trying to work with your technology, we'd be happy to listen to.
Yeah, I sent it to Nicole. Nicole, have you received it yet?
No, not yet.
It's gone through, so you should have it. I will just go ahead and say some of the first things on the first couple of slides before she gets it up, and then you can kind of see visually. I was one of the first 2 homes in Sandcastles with Village Park Homes in 2016. And did you get it, Nicole? I just saw you pop up. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Ah, there we go.
All right, if you can scroll to the next slide. Okay, so there's my property. I was one of the first 2, like I said, in Sandcastles back in 2016. I talk about this a little bit later on, but one of the things I did want to clarify in the public comments, someone made a comment about us applying for a variance similar to this prior to closing on the home. And that was actually done by the builder, and the purpose was to try to build the pool outside of the home, nothing to do with patio. There was no discussion about vegetation. It was all about the building setback, the 20-foot building setback. So anyways, yes, I have been through the variance process and you can go to the next slide, Nicole, please. Was very aware of the building setback, that we couldn't build a permanent structure and a vertical structure, et cetera. So this was my survey provided by the builder. If you zoom in, you can see the 20-foot building setback line, but there is no notation about a vegetation buffer. This was what Village Park Homes gave me. Like I said, I was very, clear that we couldn't build something permanent, vertical, et cetera. But I, had no way of knowing. I had no reason to think I needed to get a full neighborhood plat and inspect that. I mean, every home I've bought, I've been given this particular site plan of my home. And, just had no need to look at a neighborhood plan that might have indicated this vegetation buffer or given more detail. So this is what I had to base it off of. So I just want to clear that up, because I know there's been some people have had plans similar to mine. Some have had some with a little bit more detail. It's been for whatever reason, all across the board with these site plans. So if you can go to the next screen, Nicole. All right, so this was my home at closing. Right before we closed, I was told that the builder had basically plowed down all the vegetation to the water's edge, and that they were issued a citation, had to come up with an acceptable revegetation plan, That was executed and approved, and this is what it looked like. It was the grasses that you see planted there, and then there was 10 feet of pine straw laid between the back edge of my home and the start of the approved vegetation. The pavers that you see there, those are not encroaching. Those were built with the house. They go just a few feet past the end of the house. So a CO was issued with the home just like this. This is how it was left, with just all that pine straw there. We didn't remove any vegetation, the builder did, and all of that. So moving on, shortly after closing, we decided we probably needed a safer place to grill that's not right underneath the home. So we extended those pavers that we had done with the original build out 8 feet. And as you can see, we did not go past the pine straw that was left for us, that was approved by the town and all of that. We did not go into the green space that was revegetated there or anything. We just stopped right short of that. So anyways, after doing that, you can move on to the next screen. This kind of gives you, the picture on the left kind of gives you a look, kind of looking back from the pine straw. The area past that step down is the extension, the 8-foot extension that we did. Those are my kids up on the upper pavers when they were a little younger a few years ago. Quickly realized that maybe having that patio without any type of barrier, and those grasses were going to definitely grow quickly as they have. We needed something that wasn't very intrusive, but would be kind of a barrier to keep an alligator from darting out of the grasses. So what you see on the right is the knee wall. So it's about 18 inches high that we installed around the border of the patio. Like I said, we figured the natural colored low wall would be the most aesthetic. A fence would have to be on the property line, which is the lagoon. So that's really not really a feasible option. And those grasses have grown, this was years ago, those grasses have grown tremendously. You cannot see the patio from across the lagoon, and you'll see that in a later slide. You can go on to the next one, Nicole. All right, so addressing the four criteria, you all obviously know what that is. We can move on to the next slide. Extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of the property. So this is my patio to scale, the black outline. One clarification, that rear lot line is angled, so it's shorter on one side, longer on the other. So why that's important is that we're not in violation on, I guess, depending on where you're standing. If you're standing, looking at the house from the rear, we're not in violation on the left-hand side. The green area is basically what would need to be removed. So I think Missy mentioned we're seeking an 8-foot variance. My calculations were a little bit less than that in order to make that green area legal per se, but that's fine, 8 foot. We definitely don't need the 15 foot that I think was mentioned as well. Like I said, removing that small little area of the green triangular patio is not going to make much of an impact. It's not going to change or improve the view or lack of by Hilton Head Beach and Tennis. There's still going to be a patio there. It's just going to be a corner section is gone. You can go ahead and move on to the next slide. All right, so extraordinary and exceptional. The lot size is extremely small, which makes them unique. Every lot in the vicinity is at least 50% bigger than the Sandcastles lots. The setbacks and buffers cut off 50% of the lot. The safety concerns, obviously I mentioned, the alligators, the wall's a non-obtrusive barrier to keep them from just darting out from those grasses. The original slope of the rear yard also caused some concerns because it was very steep down into the lagoon. And definitely not as visible with all the plantings that were there now. The lagoon, of course, provides another 100 to 200 foot buffer to beach and tennis. And without the rear patio, the yard is essentially useless. And again, like many others, there's no notation on this site plan here to a vegetation buffer, just a building setback. You can move on to the next. These conditions do not apply to other properties. So one clarification, per the Sandcastles survey, the vicinity is broader than just Sandcastles. So when we're talking about homes that are similar, vicinity is Berks Beach Road, some of the areas of Folly Field, Matthew. You can move on to the next. So there's another picture of our development, and then of course the close-up of the actual vicinity as described on the site plan, including areas beyond sandcastles. All right, you can move on. So this is kind of a broader look at the real vicinity map, including homes, all around our area. Every lot on this map is 50% larger than Sandcastle. So, one can say that, we knew what we were buying into, absolutely. But, think about the times that you have bought a home and once you live in it and use it, you think, oh, this doesn't work as well as I thought, or, maybe we need to make some alterations to our yard in this way, or whether it be interior or exterior, you kind of learn how you use a property and what works and what doesn't. And we all make alterations, to our property. So, in this particular case, it wasn't, let's go just do it and ask for permission later. Like I stated, there was nothing on the site plan that led me to believe it was an issue. And I was going over the pine straw, not into the grasses that I knew had to be there because of the plan that was put into place between the builder and Hilton Head and approved. So yes, it was, we knew what we were buying into, but of course, once we, kind of got there and started using the property, like I explained in the beginning, learned that there were some modifications that needed to be made, and did not know that we were, doing anything that was not allowed. You can move on to the next. Applicable, extraordinary, and exceptional. The application does not meet criteria set forth because there's no extraordinary, exceptional conditions. I feel like lot size extremely small makes them unique. I feel like that fits the criteria. Every lot in the vicinity is at least 50% bigger. I think that makes it extraordinary and exceptional. The setbacks and the buffers cut off 50% of the lot. It's not typical of the lots in the vicinity to have those types of setbacks and buffers. And then, of course, the safety concerns, which I know from other people who live in Bluffton, Beaufort County, have applied for similar variances like this for safety concerns with sloping, alligators and lagoons, things like that, whether it be a fence, a wall, or whatever, and have been approved for that. And I do feel like, it is an extraordinary and an exceptional condition. You can move on to the next. All right. And then, so the town's conclusion of law that it does not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity, I feel like we've illustrated that the vicinity is larger than Sandcastle, that every lot in the vicinity other than Sandcastle is at least 50% bigger. The Sandcastle setbacks and buffers, like I stated, cut off 50% of the lot. Most of the lots, like I said just a minute ago, don't have some of the same safety concerns. Utilization of the property is restricted. The outdoor space is expected. That's even been stated in some of the previous meetings by some of the board members, that it's expected that you would have an outdoor space outside of your property that you can use. And so, I do think the fact that we don't, does make it an extraordinary, exceptional situation that does not, is not similar to the other properties around us. You can go on to the next one. All right, and then talking about being of substantial detriment to adjacent properties, you can go on, thank you. So no natural or landscape buffers have been altered, as I showed you in the first pictures. We simply went over the pine straw that was there. No structures in the setbacks are impeding air circulation or light. Stormwater runoff calculation does not apply. It's sloped, there's grading, it's gravity, it goes down the hill into the lagoon. None of that has been altered. There never was a natural vegetative buffer that was removed other than the grasses that are still existing, which are much larger now. No existing natural flora was disturbed. No one's harmed. My neighbor who you just heard from at 25 is asking for the same variance. The neighbor at 29 is the only actual patio you can see from beach and tennis, and ironically is in compliance because it doesn't go over the vegetation setback buffer. You can move on to the next. So this is looking from property 29 next to me over into my property, and then looking from 25, who you just heard from, onto my property. Those are actually, those Italian cypress are trees that we planted that we even added after. You can see the grasses there. This was taken a couple years ago, probably about 2 years ago. So obviously not a detriment to either one, left or right of me, who can hardly view the property as well, or the patio, excuse me. And then this is my house today. This was taken by a professional photographer last week. As you can see, the patio and wall are not visible. The patio, ironically, again, to the left of me is very visible, but it's not beyond the setback. If you go to the next slide, it'll zoom in and show you even up close. So right now, those grasses are kind of dead, obviously, from wintertime. The landscaper, of course, trims them occasionally. They're usually even taller than that, but I mean, even with binoculars, you can't see the patio. The section that I would have to remove, you would not see unless you had some type of binoculars that can shoot out and then go down 90 degrees. So it's very hidden. You know, it cannot be viewed by anyone across the lagoon. And the grasses, like I said, are normally much higher than they are right now. And go on to the next. So to kind of summarize, and I've got a couple more slides after this, I feel like all the criteria has been met. I'm offering to plant as much more. You know, 25 next to me, as you saw in his picture, is very, very densely vegetated with lots of plants that are now grown pretty tall. We could do the same. Looking for a solution where we can safely use the backyard and don't truly infringe on anyone else's enjoyment of their property. Of course, no one but my neighbors can really see the backyard, and certainly not anyone at beach and tennis. My understanding is the fence is okay along a property line, but like we talked about, that isn't really practical along the lagoon edge. My understanding is that each application is considered and voted on individually. And I have addressed all of the concerns that I feel like I've heard from you guys from the previous presentations, and I have just a couple more slides after this. So it's my understanding that the town does not get involved in private covenants. However, it was brought up in previous comments by Beach and Tennis. It was brought up in this presentation when you guys first started. And I would kind of like to understand kind of what trumps what. If this decision on mine, the other lagoon variance, is being made mainly due to these covenants, not wanting to make a decision that goes against them or to upset Beach and Tennis, I kind of just wanted to clarify what I'm reading here in the covenants that were signed back in '93. And it says, for redevelopment of the property, you cannot disturb the vegetation buffer unless the lagoon between Sandcastles and Beach and Tennis is being used as an amenity in connection with, quote, any structure. And the example they gave was a restaurant that wants to build in the direction of the lagoon. They may alter and remove trees and plants in the buffer to enhance the view. A building erected, for instance, like having a loading dock, whose purpose obviously is not to take advantage of the view, would not be allowed. So I'm curious, if the town wasn't involved, would we not be in violation? The home is a structure that obviously wants to take advantage of the view, as all homes that are building on lagoons or the ocean here or whatever. You know, Beach and Tennis would be forced to be okay with a restaurant or a hotel here, and that would they would be allowed to alter the buffer if they're just trying to take advantage of the view. I didn't see anywhere in these private covenants where it said we could not take advantage of the 10-foot option. It does clearly state that they want a 20-foot option in the covenants, but again, that it could be that buffer could be altered to enhance the view. But I don't see anything that says we couldn't take advantage of the 10-foot, and that is something that I have considered. And I talked with Nicole about this in the beginning, and I think it was stated that it was too costly and we decided not to do it, but we actually ended up getting that cost brought down at one point. I think COVID and all of that happened, and I don't recall exactly what transpired from there, but we definitely got the cost brought down, and it was something that we were all considering doing. Certainly, it could be difficult to get 100% approval when we've got lot owners that live overseas and such, but in terms of people who actually have homes in Sandcastle, I don't have any doubt that we would have any problem getting that approved. So I kind of feel like if that is an option, that granting this variance shouldn't be an issue either, as we're asking for 8 foot, and that would reduce it to 10. And I don't even need 10, I only need 8. So I would like some clarification about the covenants and how that works, and also just pointing out that they have stated that the buffer can be altered if we are trying to take advantage of the view. You can move on to the next. Comments about removing vegetation. I've proven that to be false. In fact, showing that now more vegetation exists. Like I said, it's frustrating to keep hearing beach and tennis residents comment about the view, because you cannot see my patio or any of the others that are encroaching. This has been proven by photos. It can be proven by anyone in person today. Ironically, the only patio that can be seen is one that is actually legal next door to me. Further, the private covenants allow for commercial redevelopment, which residents would have had to have been okay with and would have brought 100 times more disturbing to these homes than these homes, and would be allowed to actually remove the buffer, alter the buffer. Again, removing my small triangle is not removing the patio or changing its use back to something that will positively affect them or restore some sense of peace that was lost. The portion that will be removed is small. It's not visible. Not even with binoculars. The comment about me applying for a similar variance before buying the property is partially incorrect. I just wanted to clarify that. That was a public comment from Beach and Tennis' attorney. A variance was applied for by the builder to build my pool in the yard behind the home when it was under construction. We knew this went back to the building setback. I was not involved in this process at all, in the application process. I wasn't made aware of any details other than the fact that they applied for it and it was denied. So I just wanted to clarify that, because there was a public comment specifically referring to that variance that the builder applied for back in 2016. So that's pretty much it. I thank you for your time, and just let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We'll again go in a rotating order with board members. This time, Mr. Johnson, you get to go first with any questions. Mr. Johnson. You may be muted, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson, you're muted on your end. If you could unmute.
Mr. Johnson, any questions from you? Does he show that he's unmuted, Ms. Haley?
It shows that he's still muted.
Let's go on in and we'll come back and see if he's back. Dr. Ponder, any questions from you?
No questions at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fingerhut, any questions from you?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Walczak, any questions from you?
Yes, I have just one minor question with regard to the covenant issue that the applicant brought up. And I'm not a lawyer and I don't understand those things without really studying them, but couldn't you see the view without patio stones below your feet?
All right. Are you asking the applicant?
Yes, the applicant. I'm asking the applicant. In other words, in other words, you can build a structure if it's to enhance the view, but why do you need a patio to enhance your view?
Well, I didn't write the covenants. The covenants state that you can alter the buffer if you're positioning a home or a structure in a way that you want to take advantage of the view. You can alter the buffer. So my point is simply that that's it. You can alter the buffer per these covenants. So if we were impeding on this buffer and it was just between us and these private covenants, what would be illegal about that?
Well, that's
our reasoning would be that we are, we are trying to take advantage of the view, and we don't want to have, we don't have trees there right now, but if we did, we didn't want to have trees and tall grasses and bushes that are totally blocking the view. Everything that's there can grow extremely tall and could completely block the view. I mean, the grasses that are there currently can certainly block the view from ground level.
Okay, now just questioning about the fact that it was emphasized any structure can be is established as long as it helps you enhance the view. That's the way I read that thing, or the way I understood it.
Right.
So, but why do you need a patio to enhance your view?
Well, I'm not referring to the patio. I'm just referring to, it wouldn't really matter if we were allowed to go into the buffer and could do a 10-foot buffer even. It wouldn't. My point is that you are allowed to deconstruct in whatever way that buffer to take advantage of the view. Yet the whole point is across the way at Beach and Tennis that their view is terrible. They're having to look at our patios and such, and that's not the case. But actually could be the case if we were building a structure that wanted to take everything out of the buffer according to those covenants.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. White, any questions from you?
I don't, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, any questions from you?
No, I do not. Thank you.
I see Mr. Johnson's screen is lit up. Mr. Johnson, any questions from you?
I have no questions at this time.
Okay, and no questions from me. Thank you, ma'am. That's the extent of your time period for presentations. Now, are there any questions or discussions of the board before we move on to the staff rebuttal, which would be 5 minutes for each one of the applications? Okay, Ms. Lewick or Mr. Newman, any staff rebuttal for any of the presentations?
No, staff has no rebuttal to add at this time.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. With there being no rebuttal from staff, there would be no rebuttal time for applicants. So we would move on to the public comment period. Ms. Haley, were there any folks who wanted to call in to make comments during the public hearings?
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Then before I think at this time, Ms. Haley, is that correct that I close the public hearing after we put everything into the record?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So at this point, unless there's an objection, we will include into the record the applications of the 4 applicants, also the staff reports, and the presentation of materials by the applicants and the staff today. Any objection, and also the public comments that we received through in writing through the town's portal or otherwise. Any objection to including any of those in the record for these public hearings? Hearing none, there will be a part of the public record.
Madam
So
Chair,
yes,
this is
ma'am.
Nicole. Did you want me to address the covenant question at all?
I think there was a general question about, pardon me, a general question about that. I was actually going to see if the staff attorney wanted to address that question. That would appear to be a legal question. Ms. Bush, if you're available to address that. Oh, there she is.
I'm here. Will you clarify exactly what the question is? I've been listening, but I'm confused on. I've heard the applicant's question, and is that the one you want answered?
I think the general question is, do private restrictive covenants apply so that the board is bound by those covenants in making its determination? And board members?
I'm sorry, no, just like state law is going to supersede local law, the LMO is going to supersede whatever a private community does. I think that what happened in the last presentation is maybe she got focused on those restrictions and on the objections from the other neighborhood, but I don't see those necessarily. I mean, they only apply to a small part of the 4 criteria, if that makes sense.
So is it accurate then to say that the board is bound by the requirements of the LMO and not so much by private covenants?
Absolutely. And Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Typically, and this is advice that we were given by our attorney years ago, but while the town doesn't enforce private covenants, if we are made aware of the covenants, we're not to issue a permit that would be in contradiction to those covenants. So because we were made aware that there's a 20-foot buffer between Hilton Head Beach and Tennis and Sandcastle by the Sea, now we wouldn't be able to reduce that buffer to 10 feet unless those covenants were revised or we received something from the POA that said that they were okay with us doing so.
And I guess what I was looking more at is what the board is tasked with doing in terms of granting a variance, and all 4 of those criteria have to be met, and that's irrespective of what any POA restrictive covenants provide.
Right. I was just making that point because Jennifer brought up in her presentation that should they try to replat the subdivision with a reduced buffer of 10 feet, would those covenants restrict them? And so that's why I was just making that, since we're now aware of them, then yeah, we would not be able to permit that unless they signed off on it.
Okay.
Great.
Mr. Walczak, I saw you were about to ask a question or have a comment about this matter.
Yeah, this whole thing about private covenants. Suppose the private covenants are more restrictive than the town. You mean to tell me the town would I guess it would be up to a private litigation for that thing then, I guess, right? The town wouldn't get involved in it. If the covenants were more restrictive than the town's ordinances.
And often they are. I don't think the town does get involved to change what a particular community agrees to do. I was looking at it more, though, based on what the criteria the board has to use to determine whether or not a variance ought to be granted, and there's the 4 criteria.
Yeah, it was just an informative thing. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other board members have questions about this particular issue? Okay. If not, then I'll close the public hearings and we'll move on to board discussion. And we can have a global discussion or discussing the individual cases, but the motions must be made on the individual cases. So for discussion purposes, we'll again go in a rotating order. And this time, Mr. White, you have the opportunity of going first with any discussion.
Well, thank you so much. I do not have any questions.
Okay. Ms. Loudermilk, you're next in this rotation.
I think I'm still wrestling with the extraordinary and exceptional conditions criteria, because I think to me that drives a lot of the whole consideration. Vicinity, again, that's my struggle. If we're talking about simply this subdivision, then I think it's easy to determine there are not extraordinary conditions. But if we're talking about the entire Foley Field neighborhood, I think there is case to be made for extraordinary conditions. So I'm struggling with that. That's what's, I think, driving my hesitation one way or another on a decision. And it's a gray area. There's no hard and fast definition of vicinity. I don't believe it's written down anywhere. It's, 500 yards, 2 miles. It's a gray area.
Lisa,
But
that's a good point, because if we take that approach, Folly Field is but one part of Hilton.
of
Why would we
course.
not include?
No, of course. So there's a common sense determination somewhere. No, you're absolutely right. But I'm just saying that's what's causing me pause in this. I'd like to hear other people's thoughts.
And just a gentle reminder for all board members that in order for a variance to be granted, with or without conditions, it must meet all 4 criteria.
Understood.
Okay. So next we go to Mr. Johnson.
I have a question that I think this pertains. Did somebody say that the walls were permissible? Or was that was non-factual?
Can
anybody answer that?
I think we heard the staff mention that, and with the permission of the board, I would ask one of the staff members to respond to that question. Go ahead, Ms. Lewick.
I actually wanted to interrupt as staff had the private covenant piece that was discussed during, I guess, our portion of the rebuttal. I didn't know if any of the, if we should ask if the applicants wanted to have rebuttal, as we did add something after you had already mentioned that because staff didn't have a rebuttal, then the applicants wouldn't, and I just didn't know if we wanted to offer that.
I think we've addressed the question about the board's purview for restrictive covenants. So I don't think that is a time for rebuttal from the applicants regarding restrictive covenants and how they apply with regard to the board's decision. But I think the question that's arisen now is about the fences. Would those be permitted, notwithstanding whatever the board might do about the particular variance request?
Missy, I can go ahead and answer. The retaining walls were determined by staff to be a permitted feature in a setback and buffer. The LMO specifically says that there's no setback requirements for retaining walls. And staff decided that if a retaining wall is in a buffer, but the buffer can still function as a buffer, be landscaped around the wall, then it would be a use that we would allow there.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, does that take care of your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Any other questions, Mr. Johnson? Or sorry, any other discussion or questions?
Yeah. If I understand this correctly, do they have to plant things back in that 10-foot area, or if they left their retaining walls and they covered that with grass, is that permissible?
With the board's discretion, I think we have to direct that back to the staff.
Right. Again, this is Nicole for the record. So what we had said was we would look at each case on a case-by-case basis with the different variance applications, and most of them just had a picture with, dirt and some vegetation. So we wouldn't make them go in and plant that full 20 feet, but we would have them tear out the patio and put pine straw or something down to stabilize the area. But we wouldn't make them plant it because the developer didn't plant it and it wasn't enforced back when those homes were CO'd.
Would grass be acceptable?
I believe we said that it would be, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I have
Anything
no
else?
other questions.
Anything else, Mr. Johnson?
I have no other questions. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Dr. Ponder, any questions from you?
Coming. Sorry, I'm going to turn my.
All right.
I don't have. Sorry, I'm getting terrible light. I don't have any questions at this time, and I think this is a regrettable set of circumstances. But I'm inclined to say that I don't think any of the criteria for issuing the variance have been met here. And I say that regrettably, but I just, that's the way I'm leaning.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fingerhut, discussion from you.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I'm inclined to agree with Dr. Ponder. There are 4 conditions. Each applicant has to meet all 4. Honestly, except for Ms. Mioto at the end, the other applicants didn't address those conditions. I mean, the law, we have, as a body, we have to follow the LMO. Above any covenants or anything else, we have to follow the LMO. The LMO sets forth 4 conditions. You need to meet all 4. And unfortunately, nobody has. In fact, really, I don't think anybody's met any of these conditions. And circling back, I'd like to go to the vicinity question, because it's an interesting point. But I feel a bit of a semantic argument because we have to apply the law in a reasonable fashion. When you say vicinity, there are some very big homes on Hilton Head with very large pools, and if somebody within a stone's throw of Sandcastle has a 50 by 100 pool, that doesn't mean that everybody in Sandcastle could also have a 50 by 100 pool. The lots just won't lawfully accommodate it. So vicinity has to carry some element of reasonableness, and we have 80 some lots to look at in Sandcastle, and I think that's a reasonable place to look, to the left and to the right and across the street. That I think that would be a reasonable interpretation of the word vicinity, not to make it the larger, Folly Field area. So here, although it is a sad result, because the patios frankly look lovely, it seems to me that they're clearly not legal. There's no argument for any of these 4 conditions. There's nothing extraordinary and exceptional, about any of these particular pieces of property, as opposed to the ones that are just like it to the left and the right of them. The conditions apply to all of the properties. And in fact, all properties, even in the greater vicinity, have setbacks and buffers that have to be observed. They may not be these setbacks and buffers, but they all have them and they all have to be observed. In terms of the utilization of the property, these homes are built out almost to the maximum buildable allowance here. I mean, you have 3.5 foot buffers, I think, on each side, and then in the front and back, again, not very much, 20 feet or so. There's no room for any more house here, so they've used it all. And as to the question of whether it's a substantial detriment to adjacent properties of the public good, I would submit that any kind of overbuilding or installation of hardscape on Hilton Head beyond which the LMO allows is a detriment to the public good by definition. So again, I just don't see any of these have satisfied any of these 4 requirements. So those are my comments.
All right. Thank you, sir. So it's down to me, and I tend to agree. I think Mr. Fingerhut explained exactly what I might add, but more eloquently perhaps than I ever could. And I see Mr. Walczak is waving. Is someone leaving? Or are you saying hello? Or are you ready to make a motion?
I think you forgot me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I wasn't on your list.
I evidently, I skipped right down. I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong list.
That's okay. No problem. No problem.
Mr. Walczak, I sincerely apologize. Please, sir.
No, not at all. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. I just wanted to say, first of all, I couldn't say it any better than David has just said it. So I think that kind of speaks volumes for this whole thing. And I just want to once again give an applause or a satisfactory statement toward our town staff, because they've dealt a lot of this. They've dealt with it for a long time, and I think they've done an excellent job. And I think we have only one decision to make. Okay, that's all I just want to say.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I have a comment if I could go out of turn.
Yes, sir. That's Mr.
Discussion.
Johnson, I think.
I'd like to throw
Mr. Johnson?
I'd like to throw something out for discussion, and not to contradict Mr. Fingerhut, but I know that nowhere has anybody satisfied all 4 conditions. I would say that an alligator is an exceptional condition, and I don't know whether we can do this with a motion that says with modifications, whether we can permit a wall to stay up and have them remove anything at all. I'm just throwing it out there for discussion. There has been in the last year and a half a woman eaten by an alligator, and I sure as heck wouldn't want that to happen to anybody else. But Mr. Fingerhut did say that he felt like the wall was a detriment to the
Can we
neighborhood.
comment on that?
Sorry, Dr. Bonner, can you say again?
Can we, or is this up for discussion now?
Sure. Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead.
I agree with you, and no one wants harm to come to any resident. But that safety requirement in and of itself is not within our purview. Further, alligators themselves are not extraordinary on this island. I could walk 5 feet right out my front door and show you one. So I don't find that to be any sort of extraordinary condition. I do feel very strongly about the safety issue, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that in and of itself is what we're here to determine today. So I don't find that meets at all with extraordinary conditions.
Mr. Fingerhut, it looks as though you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Dr. Ponder, and I would also say that if safety is the primary concern, that wall can be built lawfully outside of the buffer, closer to the house, and have the exact same effect on repelling reptiles. But it's not. I don't think that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about having a larger patio. The wall could go within the appropriate footprint if safety is really the concern. So I don't really. I mean, alligators are common here, so I don't believe that's really the issue.
Any other general discussion from board members before I ask for a motion on specific applications? Hearing none, I would ask if there's a motion on VAR 1875-2020, that is the Snyder application at 119 Sandcastle. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Fingerhut.
Thank you. That the application for a variance be denied based upon the findings of fact and conclusions of law of the town staff.
Okay.
I will.
Second by Mr. Walczak. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Ms. Haley, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Walczak?
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk?
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson?
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder?
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut?
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson?
For the motion.
And Madam Chair, if I may note for the record, Mr. White has left the meeting, so he will not be included in the vote.
Okay, yes, ma'am. So then we have a 6-0 vote, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, the next matter is VAR 0001870-2020, the Zidlaw application at 123 Sandcastle. Is there a motion?
I can make the motion to
Yes, sir, Mr. Walczak.
that the Board of Zoning Appeals disapprove the application based on those findings and facts and conclusions of law found on by the staff.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fingerhut. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Haley, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Walczak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, ma'am. The next matter is VAR 0001894-2020, the Ritchie application at 25 Sandcastle. Is there a motion?
I can do that again. I move that the Board of Zoning Appeals disapprove the application based on those findings and facts and conclusions of law found in the staff determinations.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fingerhut. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Haley, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Walczak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 6-0.
And the next matter is VAR 0001983-2020, the Mioto application at 27 Sandcastle. Is there a motion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a motion
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
that the application for a variance be denied based upon the findings of fact and conclusions of law of town staff.
Is there a second to the motion?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
Seconded by Mr. Walczak. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Haley, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Walczak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you all. That concludes the applications for the 4 variances today. Those applicants, we thank you for your time and participation. There will be a notice of action prepared by the staff, signed by the appropriate board members making the motion in second and by the chair, and will be sent to you by certified mail. If you want to stay on to listen to the rest of the board meeting, you're welcome to do that, but you're not required to stay on with us. The next item on our agenda is board business. Just a couple of quick updates from me. Did make the semi-annual report to the town council this past last Tuesday. And during that report, I mentioned that we had made a request for LMO amendments to be considered, and also that we were going to be looking at our rules of procedure and doing our board training. So just a quick question of staff about the status of those 3 matters. any forecast of when the LMO amendments might be considered?
Nicole, do you know that?
No, I'll just say it's going to be several months down the road. We've got a list that we have started, but we have not done any kind of drafting yet. And I think I mentioned it during our last meeting that it was kind of put on hold due to COVID and more priority type things had taken place, kind of pushed that to the back burner. But we will be taking that back up again and doing the research and drafting those amendments. So it'll probably be several months before we have any kind of update.
We have some interference in the background. Yeah, there it goes. I saw that the Planning Commission LMO committee is starting to meet again. I would ask the staff members to keep this on the agenda so that we can be reminded of a status report at each of our regular meetings.
And this is Terry Lewis. If I can just add for a minute, I was going to say, so we do have the LMO committee is going to meet on March 8th at 10, I believe, and they're going to take back up the discussion related to the massing of buildings, heights and setbacks and buffers. It's something that we have probably almost a year ago had started discussing with the LMO committee and the DRB and the DRBs. And at that point, we were only talking about the resort development district. At this point, the DRB has opened it up to more of the island. So we are going to start that discussion on March 8th.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that. Ms. Loic, rules of procedure, I know you and I and Ms. Bush are taking a look at that, and I did find some model rules from the Municipal Association of South Carolina. So I don't know whether or not we'll have a busy agenda in March, but perhaps we could look at least a status report at that time.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And board training, thank you very much, Ms. Haley, for giving us information on the status of our individual training. And I know that staff is working on doing some other training, and I see Ms. Bush lit up her screen. Perhaps you might have a status report for us. Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead.
I did. As time has allowed, I've been diving into case law, because my understanding is that the board has an interest in perhaps looking at which fact scenarios lead to which rulings as cases are appealed. So I've been working on that, and I'm about at the point where I'm ready to start to sort of pull it together. And my hesitation is I don't know how to. I'm really not very good with PowerPoints and that kind of thing. So Nicole and Missy, I may come knocking at y'all's door for help just to put it together in a way that makes sense. But I have been able to find a fair amount of cases, and I hope that is the direction that you wanted me to go. If not, I can tweak and change. But what I was seeking to do was to find some distinct fact scenarios so that everybody could get an idea of, some of these things that we've just been talking about, the nuances with what type of area, what is extraordinary, that kind of stuff, or how the courts have defined it.
Yeah. Questions or comments from board members about that process proposal described by Ms. Bush? Just one quick thing. I think it might be helpful if there have been cases. I've noted some cases involving the town of Hilton Head Island. There are reported cases, and it might be helpful to give a brief summary of those and see if any are applicable to any of the procedures that we're following.
Yes, Madam Chair. I can include those.
Thank you. And a general reminder that we have until June 30 to complete our training. So Ms. Haley will continue to help us out with where we stand. No other board business from me. We'll move on to the staff report. Ms. Lewick, I understand we have a waiver report, which we have in writing. I'm mindful of our time commitment here. Ms. Lewick, if there's something you will want to point out to us, that'd be great. Otherwise, I would just ask board members if they have any questions or comments of that written waiver report. Hearing none, we'll make that a part of our record. Any other business to come before the board? With no other business, our meeting is adjourned as of 5:21 p.m. with thanks to patience of board members, assistance of staff, to the public and the applicants. Thank you all. Good evening.
Thank you.